Ashley will be taking us through this venturing and spinouts. So we already have been introduced to Ashley. Handing over to you.
Thank you. So, after a big lunch like that, we'll see how interesting I am if I keep you awake. So, when I acknowledge people at the beginning of one of my talks, it's because I've stolen their slides. And if you acknowledge them, that makes it scholarly research, and if you don't acknowledge them, it's plagiarism. But I didn't steal people from these people. These are the people who asked me to write this talk. And I wrote it when Autumn started its first course on how to do startups. And they said, we need somebody to explain how capitalization tables work. So it was Lita Nelson, Steve Samet, and Terry Willey. Okay. So incremental inventions generally get licensed to existing companies, either small companies, medium, or large. Revolutionary inventions generally need a startup, because the existing players don't believe that their technologies can ever become obsolete. And they probably don't want to see them become obsolete because they've invested so much money in getting them to where they are. In the US, small and medium-sized enterprises are about 55 to 60% of all the licenses we do out of Autumn, and large companies, which in the US definition is over 500 employees, are 20 to 25%. Startups are those 20%. So if you think about your pathway to market, you license to an existing small company or a large company or a new company. This, to the large and the existing small companies, is licensing, and if you go to a new company, it's entrepreneurship. And frequently what you find is the small companies do the early stage development, and then at some point when they need an established sales force, large-scale manufacturing, a lot of money to do late-stage clinical trials, things like that, they turn around and partner with a large company for the last stages. And in my paradigm, my course that I used to teach, the entrepreneurship side, we called the first look venture analysis, and as yesterday we saw the first look technology assessment for the licensing route. So what do you need to launch your venture? You need really about 4 things. You need money, you need a technology, and you need people. And sooner or later, and sooner is probably better than later, you're going to need customers or partners. University spin-out companies in the US, these are typically enabled by the university rather than actually organized by the university. At BU, we had a we had a unit that would help start a company, but the impetus either had to come from the faculty member saying, I want to start a company, and then we would help him or her, or an entrepreneur reached out to the faculty member and said, hey, I think what you're doing would be great for a startup. So, as I said, the driving force is generally the faculty inventor, sometimes a postdoc or graduate student, and an entrepreneur. And then you negotiate a license or an option to the patents, write the business plan, raise startup funding, and then the license is intended to ensure that the technology is developed or the license is terminated. So we want to make sure the technology is developed, or if they fail, we want to terminate the license and we get the technology back and we find somebody else. And a very important part of your license agreement should be that if you terminate for material breach by the licensee because they didn't meet their developmental milestones, you get all the data they've developed. They're going to say, what? We've spent millions of dollars on that. You want us to give it to you for free? And the answer is yes, because my patents have a limited lifetime, and you have burnt part of that lifetime, and I can't get it back. So yes, you're going to give me that data. I'll give you an example. Emory, as you know, probably has been the source of a significant number of HIV drugs. And they had one that they had licensed to a small company that had developed it, and then Burroughs Wellcome. And this company had done a partnership with Glaxo, and Burroughs Wellcome wanted to buy the company, and as part of that, they were forced to divest this HIV drug. When it was licensed to them, it was preclinical. They got a 5% royalty. When it went out the second time, they had phase 2 data that had been developed that had been given back to them as part of the termination. They got a 20% royalty rate, and then they monetized that and got $525 million as a lump sum payment for the royalty rights. That's the illustration of the importance of this clause of getting the data back if we terminate it because it's your fault, okay? And do you know what happened to Emory's tech transfer office the next year? The year after they got this $525 million big hit, they cut their patent budget. Got a question?
Yeah. Just want to understand if Emory had to give anything for that phase 2 development, till that phase 2 development.
Nope.
Nothing.
Nope.
Wow.
They got the data back and licensed it to a new company that I think got bought by Gilead. And as part of the acquisition by Gilead, they monetized it. They said, we don't want to have that royalty obligation. We'll give you a lump sum now, and then our margins will look better down the road. So the license, as I say, we want to make sure the technology is developed or license terminated, and the university is fairly compensated for success. And an equity stake spreads the risk. Technology-specific payments on addition, normal licensing terms. Here's a great quote from Joyce Brinton, who ran tech transfer at Harvard for many years. Equity is just cash that hasn't turned green yet. It was kind of a funny comment because Harvard had this tradition that they didn't actually take equity in their spin-out companies. And which, I joined the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, which is an affiliated hospital of the Harvard Medical School, which meant we weren't obliged to follow their corporate rules. Our faculty were Harvard faculty. They had to obey Harvard faculty rules. But when I was told this, oh, we don't take equity, I thought it was an economic nonsense. And one of the first things I did was write a justification to the president of Dana-Farber that we should. And I wrote it, I gave it to him, and he read it and called me in for a meeting, and he was grilling me so hard. It was the worst grilling that I'd ever got at Procter & Gamble. And they were pretty rigorous. And I thought, oh God, I've ruined my career this quickly. And then he suddenly said, well, if we do this, and I knew I had him. And, you know, within 3 years, everybody within Harvard was taking equity. Here is my share certificate from GenMap. This is the first company set up to work on the human genome. I was co-founder, CEO. Company survives today in a way, in that, have you heard of myriad genetics? The inherited breast cancer gene? Yeah, it spun out of my company. And I say spun out. I returned a phone call from Eli Lilly where Lilly told me they wanted to hire somebody to clone the inherited breast cancer gene. That wasn't something we could do. We were molecular geneticists. But the man I'd recruited to chair my scientific advisory board, he was population genetics. He could do that. So I left at that point. My successors negotiated a deal with Lilly, whereby Lilly would do a contract with us, because we were an established company with employees and directors and investors and all that kind of stuff. And then my company would turn around and do a deal with a new company set up by the chairman of my scientific advisory board, Mark Skolnick of the University of Utah, because just being part of my company had given him a taste for having his own company. And he'd actually do the work. And he was a very smart man and realized he didn't need my company in the middle. Went to Lilly, did the deal with them directly, and that's why my share certificate is sitting on the wall in my office, not locked up in a safety deposit box. And that's how close I got to being really, really, really rich. Now, in intellectual property terms, Skolnick stole our trade secret information. We knew that Lilly wanted to pay for this, and that information wasn't publicly available. And the investors in my company considered suing Skolnick, but said, nah, we didn't lose that much money. We learned so much more, and Oxford Bioventures went on to invest in all sorts of great genomic spinouts from NIH. So we'll just move on. So I have this nice piece of artwork framed on the wall of my office. So I'm going to talk about the financing cycle of a startup company. We'll talk about equity. We'll look at the ideal cycle of funding. We'll look at the dark side when things go wrong. And we'll look at exit mechanisms, IPO and acquisition. So let's look at the financial life cycle of a company. Here's the valley of death from 35,000 feet. You start the company. Cash starts to go out as you develop things. You start selling, things turn around, and you get into the commercialization phase, and you get cash flow positive. Very nice. Here's what it looks like further on. You start out with a feasibility phase when you're studying it to look and see if this is going to work. And that doesn't cost you anything, because you do that while you're at your existing job, in your nights and weekends, working out if it's going to work. Then you say, okay, it's going to work. So you start up. And you first do your proof of concept work, and some cash flows out. And if your proof of concept is successful, you move into full-scale development, and more cash flows out. If that's successful, then you gear up for manufacturing and launch, and that gets even more expensive. And then you get early sales. But early sales are still loss-making because you can't charge enough to cover all your fixed costs, so even more money flows out. And then you get to that magical point, the most important point in a startup company's life, when it reaches cash break-even, and now its incremental sales are bringing money into the company, not taking it out. So you get positive cash flow, and this is the amount of money that you have to finance to get to that point of positive cash flow. That's the financing need. And then you get on your ongoing sales and marketing that get to be profitable, and eventually you get to the point where there's actually more money in the company than about zero over its lifetime, and you have positive shareholders' equity. And I'm not sure why this is saying a cost-driven negotiation. I don't think that was what was on my original slides. But as you look at these different stages in the development, they become financing milestones. This will be your seed round, Series A, Series B, Series C, and then somewhere over here will be where you either get acquired or go positive, or go public. So that's seed, Series A, Series B, Series C, and somewhere around there, the IPO. So how does a university get equity in a company? Well, you do it as part of the license, either in lieu of an upfront fee, plus normal other cash royalty terms. We talked about them yesterday, milestones, annual minimums, running royalties, or fully paid up. I think the best practice is the first. Equity gives some return if the license is terminated. The UK and I think Australia and New Zealand, they have done their startups with the university taking the lead, getting a large equity stake, and assigning the technology to the startup. Now, as you know, we don't think assigning is a good practice, but if you do that, you're vulnerable to dilutive rounds of financing that I'll show you in a moment. And I was working on a lawsuit, and I was looking at a company called BioVex, which was actually in the next town from where I live, Woburn. And it was acquired by Amgen for $1 billion, about 670 million upfront and 330 million contingent, so about $1 billion in total. As I looked at it, I thought, this looks like it's a University College London startup. And I told you, I think, that I go on vacation with the guy who ran Techtransfer at University College London for many years, Cengiz Tarhan. So I called him up and I said, Cengiz, is BioVex one of yours? He said, yep. He said, but I don't have much to do with it now. I said, oh, apart from cashing the checks. And he said, well, no. He said, we got 25% of the founders round equity, and the inventor got 25% of the founders round equity, and we each made £475 from the sale of the company for $1 billion. The company had 6 rounds of financing, one of which will fall in the category of what I called the dark side, heavily dilutive. He said, now the grad student joined the company as chief scientific officer. So each time they did a round of financing, the company gave him options to keep him incentivized and happy. And all Cengiz will let me say is he made many millions of dollars, and the university, which had 25% of the founders round, got £475. Okay, so there are dangers in doing an fully paid up for equity license agreement. There's the BioVex story. I forgot I put it in here. So the other way you can get equity in a startup is providing services, incubation space. We did that at BU for many years. We would give our companies space, access to all the services in return for equity. And it was kind of like being a venture fund. A venture fund knows that a lot of its companies will fail or only do mediocrely, and 1 or 2 will provide the payout. And it was the same for us. Our big payout came, I don't know if you've ever heard of a battery company called A123 Systems. It pioneered lithium iron phosphate batteries based on technology by Professor Yet-Ming Chang at MIT. When they went public, we had twice as much stock for having incubated them as MIT had for licensing them the technology. So we had 1 or 2 other big hits. We moved away from the model because most of them didn't work out. and there was too many negative stories versus the few positive stories, and we went to a cash rental basis after that, which I thought was a mistake. Other things you can do, you might provide interim management, might help write the business plan, fundraising, recruiting the management team. When I was at Biotechnica, my first biotechnology company, we set up several spin-out companies using new technology. And we would recruit the scientists, write the business plan, raise the funding, recruit the management team, and we finished up with about a 30% stake in these companies. So, it can be a very attractive way to earn equity stakes. And some companies, some universities have the ability to invest in the company. Obviously, you have to have an investment fund. These are getting quite popular in the UK. I mean, Oxford has a £1 billion captive venture fund, Oxford Science Enterprises. And in the US, this is being done increasingly by a company called Deerfield Management, which forms a partnership with individual universities and raises a venture fund for them. Most university assistance to spin-outs is in kind. Things like business plan development, management team recruitment, incubation, pre-seed, grant funding. We don't get a return on that, though some universities are trying to, using simple agreements for future equity, safe agreements. Some universities have their own funds, say from a big hit. I think John described that from their $350 million from Bristol Myers Squibb, Florida State created a fund. Some come from the operating budget, part of the endowment, alumni, things like that, or from philanthropic sources. I'm going to go on now and talk about capitalization tables. So what is a cap table and why are they important? The cap table shows what the company is worth at any one point in time, who owns how much of the company, and how much their share is worth. So how that cap table changes over time shows you how the company's value is changing up or down, and who's going to get how much when the company is sold or goes public. Now, pre-financing, before the company raises any money, it has complete flexibility over its cap table. So first of all, the first thing you've got to do is, how do you divide the pie up between the different founders? The easy route is to say equal shares. It's kind of simplistic, and different people bring different things and make different commitments to the company. And a rational analytic approach I came across, and remember what I said at the beginning of the valuation talk, always have a basis for your proposal. I call it multivariable contribution analysis. As I said, have a basis. So if you look at a startup, some of the important steps are having the idea, writing the business plan, getting some technology, both in patents and know-how. And then you need people to commit and take on risk. You need people who know the area. And then you're going to have people who have performed certain management functions. And I've said, I think these are the weights. The idea and the patents and the domain knowledge, I think, are the most important contributions. Writing the business plan is pretty straightforward once you've had the idea, and so on. Now, you could argue about these in a negotiation, but have a basis. So let's say these are the contributions. Founder one brings had the bulk of the idea, and the next two help flesh it out, and so forth. The patents all came from founder number 4, so he gets 10 points on that. Each of these adds up to 10 across, and when you tot it up, founder 1, I'm sorry, this got kicked over. Founder 1 finishes up with 19.3%, founder 2 with 35.4%, 1926.3, and that would be a rational way to assign the value between the founders. How much for the university? Great question, the big one. In the US, we have two models. An anti-dilution model, which says something like, give me 5%, but keep me at 5% till you've raised $5 million in equity financing. Often combined with preemptive rights, and preemptive right means I have the right to buy shares in additional rounds of financing to stay at 5%. I have the right, but not the obligation. Obviously, you have to have an investment fund to be able to exercise that. And then there's what I call the co-founder model, where the university is treated just like the other founders. So if you have 4 founders plus the university, they get 20% each on the equal weight model. And then you get diluted equally in subsequent financings. Columbia University has a model, a standard equity model for every startup, for all sectors of technology. They get 5% ownership, maintained till the company closes a Series A financing, typical for that sector. Now, I've challenged Oren Herskovitz, who's now left Columbia. So are you saying if the Series A for that sector, like pharma, is $60 million, you could protect 5% till 60 million? He said he wasn't sure if they'd ever got that far. But doing it this way rather than a set amount raised is one way to go. And then the royalty terms vary by sector. Things higher for software and pharmaceuticals, let's say. Lower for engineering, manufacturing, because it depends on profitability. And then the startup and Columbia bring data relevant to that sector as the basis for the negotiations. The UK model, the big 6 at least, is the university gets 50% of the founders round, all other founders get 50%, and then it's all equity, fully paid up, and no royalties, milestones, etc. Has resulted in some interesting initiatives. It said Imperial Innovations, PLC. I talked about that yesterday. The IP group, formerly called IP to IPO, which has funded the new Oxford Chemistry Building, has deals with a number of UK universities. The Oxford deal was, they gave Oxford £20 million towards the new Oxford Chemistry Building in return for half of the university's stake in any company that resulted from research in the building. That was a pretty damn creative way to finance that building. And those are the other universities they've done a deal with. As I said, there's Oxford Science Enterprises, £850 million, $1 billion in 2 funds. So that's looking at the cap table before financing. Yes?
So is there any method, standard, or any golden rule that how equity is diluted when the funding is raised?
That's where we go next. That's where we go next, okay? I love it when people ask the question for the next slide. Great. So I'm going to give you some definitions, okay? And there are so many definitions here. If I gave you all the definitions, you would be asleep. So we'll do as few definitions as we need to get through a section, okay? So common stock. Common stock represents a partial ownership in a company. You own shares of the assets, the income. It is not debt. There's no obligation to repay it ever. Now, very mature companies do start buying back their stock, but that's purely, excuse me, at their discretion. Common stock is generally paid for by effort, the original sweat equity, if you will. So founders, management, the technology, consultants, they get paid in common stock. Now, as I said, before the company is financed, it can issue as much stock as it likes. Once you have raised financing, as part of that financing, the financial sources will tightly control the creation of stock after the financing. Common stock is generally the stock that gets sold in a public offering or a mergers and acquisition, and all other classes of stock get converted to common stock the night before the acquisition or the IPO. Founder stock is just the first stock that's sold at a company by the people who found the company. It's common stock and is sold at par value, typically 1 cent per share or even 1/10 of a cent per share. And that's because the company has no assets at the time that the company is formed. It's going to acquire some assets soon afterwards and acquire a value, but at the time it's formed, it has no assets. So that is the fair market value of the stock at that time. And a lot of what we do in starting and growing companies is designed to minimize the tax liability to the founders and management, okay? And we'll see how ways that happens later. Now, even selling stock at 1 cent a share can give you some initial running around money, enough money to pay a lawyer to incorporate you and things like that. So if you sell 2 million shares at 1 cent per share, that's $20,000. And most lawyers in places like Boston will have a startup package that they can incorporate the company, give you the employment agreements and things like that you need for $20,000. And as I said, we're trying to maximize the tax benefits for founders. There will be no immediate tax liability when they buy their shares for 1 cent a share, because that was the fair market value. And then any gain will be taxed at capital gains rates, which are lower than ordinary income rates. So here is my share certificate, as I said. You can see the par value was 1 cent per share. Let's look at our founders round. Let's say we have a professor and 2 postdocs, the university and the CEO. And the CEO says, without me, you're nothing. So I'm going to get 1 million shares, 40%. The postdocs get half of what the professor gets. And the university says, I'm going to get the same as the professor. So this is what they will pay for their shares at 1 cent per share. And you'll see we get $25,000 coming in. And these are the ownership stakes in the company. And it's 100%. And that's the value of those shares. We have 2.5 million shares issued and outstanding, 2.5 million shares fully diluted, and we've raised $25,000 in this round, and that's all the money the company's ever raised. So the number one mistake of startups: giving out too much founders' equity to people who don't join the company. It's extraordinarily motivating to people who do. And the venture capitalists may insist to get undone. And there is a wonderful movie you should look for. It's called Startup.com. And I'm not sure if it is available on Netflix anymore. It was done just after the dot-com crash. And it's about 2 guys who start a .com, and it takes it through the lifetime. And at one point, there were 3 guys, and they each got 1/3 of the company. And one guy said, well, look, I'm sorry, guys, I'm not going to join the company, leaving the 2. He had all that stock. And watching that get undone is really, really ugly. So that's one movie you should watch. Another movie you should watch is called, I'm blanking, it'll come. Actually, I think I have a slide at the end on it. But that's another one you should watch. Extraordinary Measures, that's it. So what's the difference you need committed people in a company. And what's the difference between involvement and commitment? And this is for the guys in the audience, okay, because women are normally pretty good at working out if a guy's really committed or just involved. Think back to the last time, and this is obviously an American slide, and I'm not sure many of you will eat bacon, but think back to the last time you had egg and bacon for breakfast. It took 2 animals to produce that meal. It took a chicken and it took a pig. Now, the chicken was certainly involved, but the pig was definitely committed. What do? The solution, you have an earn-in. You don't give them all that stock up front. Maybe you say, I'll give you 1 year up front, and the rest of your stake you'll earn monthly as long as you stay with the company, and after 4 years, you'll have it all, okay? The inventors of the technology, they vest all their founders' stock when they assign their interest in the IP to the company, okay? If the technology is owned by an individual. As I've said, the university won't assign, it will exclusively license. So let's look at our seed round, the first serious money going in. Typically in the US, and this is probably a bit out of date now, but I wrote this talk 20 years ago, $150,000 to $1 million. And this is enough to fund the company to the proof of principle stage. If it's at proof of principle already, based on work done in the university, maybe you can skip seed and go straight to venture capital. So this is where you get friends from friends and family, also known as friends, family, and fools. I had 2 BU professors who raised their startup funding from family, saying it did make for some rather tense Christmas dinners. Angels, bands of angels, that's organizations of rich people who will be organized and have companies come in and present, and then they decide individually whether to invest in a particular company. Seed funds, often economic development funds from state and city sources. Venture capitalists typically won't invest this amount of money. It's too small. They have high transaction costs and high due diligence costs. When I raised the first round for GemMap, it was $800,000 with another $1 million when we met milestones. And I think 15% of that $80,000 went to the lawyers who did it all. It was just ridiculous. So if you do a seed round, you can do them through much cheaper instruments like a convertible debt that won't cost nearly as much to do. So definitions, you saw it just now, issued and outstanding. That's shares which have been paid for and for which a share certificate has been issued, as opposed to shares which have been promised to somebody through an option or a warrant. An option says you have the right to buy so many shares at this price for this long, okay? You don't have to put up any money for them then. Obviously, you will only exercise that option if the shares are now worth more and you're going to be able to sell them at a profit, okay? Authorized capital, that's the number of shares the board of directors has authorized the company to sell, and that gets increased from time to time. But as I said, the investors will strictly control how many shares the company can issue. Pre-money, this is the heart of startup valuation. It's the price of the company's stock agreed by the buyer, the new investor, and the seller, the company. It's a negotiated figure. Your accountant cannot tell you the pre-money value of your company, okay? It's a negotiated figure, and I'll show you how we negotiate in a moment. And it's important because it determines how much of the company the next round of investment will buy, and hence the dilution to existing investors. As an example, suppose you need to raise $2 million and an investor has agreed to pay $1 a share. So if the pre-money value of the company is 1 million, then that means a million shares already exist. You're going to need to sell 2 million more shares to raise your $2 million. That's twice as much as already exist. So the new shareholders will own 2/3 of the company. The dilution is by 2/3. On the other hand, if you could negotiate a pre-money value of the company of $5 million, then 5 million shares already exist at $1 million. 2 million shares need to be sold to raise our 2 million, and that's only 40% more than currently exist. So the new shareholders will own 28.6% of the company, and dilution is by 28.6%. That's why this figure is so important. And if you do your anti-dilution negotiation and you say 5% to 5 million, and the guy says, no, 4% to 5 million. And you say, no, I want 5%. He says, well, okay, how about 5% to 4 million? That sounds easier because the percentage you own stays the same, but it'll be equivalent to going for 4% to 5 million, okay? And we'll look at anti-dilution at the end if we have time. Some fundamental relationships. As we've just seen, the number of shares sold is the amount you need to raise divided by the price per share. The post-money value of the company is the pre-money value plus the amount you've just raised. And dilution is the amount raised divided by the post-money value. So let's go back to our seed round. The founders want to raise $200,000 and they decide to price it at 80 cents per share. How much of the company should they give up? Well, they feel 10% feels about right. This values the company at $2 million, about $2 million pre-money. 200,000 divided by 10% is 2 million. And the professor's stake is now worth $400,000. And his wife is really pleased. She starts cooking him really nice meals. Here's what our cap table looks like. Here's the shares that the professor and the CEO and the university will own. Here's our seed investors who bought 250,000 shares at 80 cents per share. That gives us our $200,000. These are the ownership percentages. The professor's gone down from 20% to 18.2%, but the value's gone up from $50,000 to $400,000. Okay? And you can see all the corresponding values. Adds up to 2.2 million. And we've now got 2,750,000 shares issued and outstanding. That was our initial 2,500,000 added to these 250,000. That's fully diluted. We've raised 200,000 in this round. We'd raised 25,000 previously. So we've raised 225,000 cumulatively. And the pre-money value was 2 million. That's this multiplied by that. And the post-money value is that plus the $200,000 we've raised. Okay? Everybody follow? And by the way, I will make these this Excel spreadsheet available so that you can do your own modeling on your own companies, okay? Definitions: convertible debt or note. This is a debt obligation of the company that is not intended to be repaid, like most debts. It's intended to be converted into stock, okay? It's a loan that won't be repaid. And it's used when the parties don't want to set the price of the stock at the time the investment is made. So you're raising money from your grandmother. She will accept whatever value you tell her the company has. And if some subsequent sophisticated investor says, no, 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 it's worth much less than that, your grandmother might be upset. So you would perhaps want to use a convertible note. And this note says, it's a simple document, so it has legal costs are low. It's about 2 pages. There's a limit to what a lawyer can charge you for a 2-page document. And you can build into it a profit for the seed investors by saying, okay, the conversion price will be 20% or 25% or 50%, whatever you want to say, less than the Series A price. Okay? Dilution, that's a decrease in a shareholder's percentage ownership without a reduction in the number of shares they hold because you issued additional shares. So the size of the pie increases, and dilution results generally from hiring new employees that you give shares to, or raising money because you give shares to the investors for their investment. The founders don't sell their own shares when the company sells equity to raise investment. The company issues new stock. As I said just now, the Professor A owned 20% before the seed round. Now she owns 18.2%, but the value of her stake has gone up to $400,000. This is good. Good dilution, that's if the new shares are sold at a price greater than the previous sale. So the percentage ownership is less, but the total value of the shares owned is greater because the pie has got bigger faster than the slice went down. Bad dilution, that's if the new shares are sold at a price less than the previous sale. The percentage ownership is less, and the total value of the shares is less because you have a smaller slice of a smaller pie. This is bad. We call that a cram down. Obviously, BioVex, I think it was its 4th round of financing, it was a cram down. An option, this is, as I said just now, the right to buy the stock at a fixed price for some time in the future, generally personal to the holder or their estate. There are 2 types under US tax laws: incentive stock options, where it has a much more favorable tax treatment. It's only available to employees, and then non-qualified stock options, which are available to everybody else. And the benefit is you don't have to put your money out to buy the stock. You know it's going to be worth something, and you don't have to pay any taxes at the time. A warrant is just like an option, the right to buy a stock at a fixed price for some time in the future, but they can be bought and sold on stock exchanges. Preferred stock. This is stock with special rights over common stock. Venture capitalists usually invest by buying participating convertible preferred stock. Convertible into common, it has all of these preferences, and the total effect of these preferences is the investors will now totally control the company. We'll look at liquidation preference in a little while, okay? Here is the preferred share certificate in GEMMAP, which is framed and hangs on the wall of my lead investor's office, because we never got acquired or went public. And you can see it's different, and you can see that the per share price is, what was it? 10 cents a share versus 1 cent per share for the common stock. If you want to learn more, the Angel Capital Association has an annotated term sheet. I think that URL is correct, but just the Angel Capital Association term sheet will find it for you. And you can see it's got all these annotations in comment boxes that explain what each thing is. And if you really want to learn a lot about it, this book, Venture Deals, Be Smarter Than Your Lawyer and Venture Capitalist, obviously two confident young men, Brad Feld and Jason Mendelson. It's about $30 on Amazon. And I got to say, their justification may be that I think it's now in the 4th edition. So perhaps it really does have some wisdom in there. But you might want to get that book. Definitions, we're almost done. Series A, Series B, Series C. These are just successive rounds of preferred stock. The first one is Series A, the next round is Series B, and so on. And the Series B usually has precedence over Series A. Now that might not sound fair. Your first investors should be on top, right? Nah. Do you want the new money or not? You want my money? I'm on top. So normally the Series A people will participate in the later rounds. And when you get to a cram down, a down round, if early investors don't pay, then they get essentially washed out of the company. University College London had no mechanism to invest in later rounds. That's why they finished up with £475. And then finally, fully diluted. That's the number of shares that will be issued and outstanding when all the options and warrants that have been issued are exercised. So let's look at our Series A venture round. We need to raise $3 million, and two funds agree to put in $1.5 million each. You often find that even for relatively modest amounts of money, a fund will want a partner. That's to A, increase their contacts with companies and other investors, and B, to spread the risk, particularly at later stages when there'll be more money involved. And they say, we want you to create a million pool of shares for stock options for future management that you're going to hire with the proceeds from the financing. And the price of the stock in this round is going to be $1 per share. And this means our seed investors will show a 25% profit because their shares will have gone from 80 cents a share to $1 a share, right? So grandma is smiling. Professor stake has gone up 25%, now worth $500,000. And the wife is starting to look at buying a second home. She's excited. Our cap table's got a lot more complex. Here's our original common share column. Now we've got the options for the management pool. And here we've got our Series A with each venture fund putting in $1.5 million, buying 1.5 million shares. You can see that the investors control the company with 52.2% on a issued and outstanding basis, although on a fully diluted basis, when the management pool's converted, they're under a half of the company. So that is the pool of shares that are held back for when we hire new people and we say, I want you to have an ownership stake in this company. If I give you shares, you'd have to pay tax. And you don't want to do that because you don't know if these shares are worth anything. So I'll give you options. You will have the right to buy this share at $1 per share for the next 7 years, let's say, okay? So if in the course of those 7 years, the stock gets valuable, company goes public, company gets bought, then you say, okay, here's my check. I want to exercise that option and buy those shares, okay? Very important tool to keep all the employees in the company motivated for the company's success. Let's say the Series A goes well. We're going to do proof of concept, and the proof of concept works. So now we want to do our Series B. Remember I said successive rounds tend to be bigger. So the first round was 3 million. Now we're going to go to 10 million. Okay? And they agree to pay $2 a share. So that means we need to sell 5 million shares to raise 10 million. And the first 2 rounds say, yep, you're doing well, we want to be part of this. But they bring in a new fund to lead the round. This is for a very technical reason. Under the rules of the US National Venture Capital Association, and also under the rules of the European Venture Capital Association, and I don't know about the Indian Venture Capital Association, but if a new fund agrees to pay a higher price, then the original investors can write up their investment to the new higher price. What that means is, when they send their annual report to their limited partner investors, they will look good. We've made good investments. They've gone up in value. You know, I can't give you any money back yet because I can't sell those shares, but they're worth more. And what a venture capitalist really cares about is being able to, it's very Darwinian. They want to procreate. They want to create the next fund. And by showing a good return from the previous fund, that increases the chances that their investors will invest in the next fund as well. So that's why you always try to bring in a new investor to lead each round. So that's what I've just said. And they say, well, you're going to hire a lot more employees with all that money, so you need to increase the management option pool by an additional 1 million shares. Professor's stake is now worth $1 million, and the wife has kind of decided where she wants the second home to be. Here's our cap table. It's got even more complicated. The management pool has gone from 1 million to 2 million. Here's the first round, 3 million shares, and here's the 5 million shares of the second round. And now the venture capitalists firmly control the company, even on a fully diluted basis. They own half the company. You can see the professors down to 4.7% issued and outstanding, 3.9% fully diluted. Remember, he started out at 20%, and the value is up to $1 million, okay? And the total value of the company is 25 million, which is the sum of all of these multiplied by $2. We've got 10.75 million shares issued and outstanding. That's these, plus these, plus these. Fully diluted, it's that, plus the 2 million shares in the option pool. We've raised 10 million in this round. We'd raised 13,225 in the previous 3 rounds. So the pre-money value is 15,500,000. That's that, plus that, plus that, times that. And the post-money value is 25,500,000, which is that, plus the $10 million we've raised. Okay? I hope you're seeing this is a fairly straightforward, logical process. Let's talk about exits. An exit means, how do we sell our shares? How do the founders, how do the management, how do the investors who put the money in get their money back and make a profit? Well, there's only 2 ways that you exit. Either an initial public offering, and this is getting increasingly hard. You know, when I really got into this business in the 80s and 90s, IPOs were very common. They got much less common. And the alternative is acquisition, either for cash or for stock, hopefully stock in a company that's already public or is close to going public. And you can see this is a longer term chart of, this is how merger and acquisition exits have increased, and this is how IPO exits have decreased. And this is, again, going up later to 2021. The exit is critical. You know, the first thing I ask a founder of a company is, what's your exit? You have to know your exit before you start the company, okay? And then you design the company to meet that exit. The initial public offering, let's say the company is ready to sell stock to the public. I mean, it's never going to be able to in 2 rounds of financing, but we won't learn anything more if I take you through a Series C, Series D. So we'll jump to the IPO. Companies ready to sell stock to the public, and the investment bankers they talk to say, yeah, you're looking very good. We think we can sell 8 million shares to the public at $8 per share. Professor's stake is now worth $4 million, and the wife has put down the down payment on the house in the country. Up 300%. Here's what the prospectus of an IPO looks like. Our cap table's now got really simple, because I said it's the common shares that get sold in an IPO or acquisition, and all the other shares, the Series A, the Series B, the stock options, get converted into stock the night before, common stock, the night before the IPO. So here's all the pre-existing shares from our seed, Series A, Series B, and here's our 8 million shares sold to the public investors. 8 million times $8 is 64 million, and the public investors own 36.6% of the company, and issued and outstanding is now the same as fully diluted because we converted the management pool into common shares. And here's the values of all of them. Professor at 4 million, university at 4 million, Series Fund A and Fund B each at 24 million, and Fund C at 16 million. The total value of the company is 166 million. The pre-money value was 102 million. That's all of these multiplied by 8. And the post-money value is, the post-money value is the pre-money value plus $64 million we've raised. Look at the build-up in value of the company. You can see that just as with our license agreement, the values go up substantially as you get closer to the marketplace, and the IPO value is way bigger than the Series B value. Definitions: registered stock. Stock that has been issued under a registration statement approved by the SEC and can be freely sold to the public. That's the stock we sold in the IPO. Unregistered stock, everything else. Stock that has not been sold in connection with a registration statement approved by the SEC, and it cannot be sold in the public markets. This is the founder shares, the management shares, the investor shares. After the IPO, you can't immediately sell the stock. Underwriters normally impose a 180-day lockup, which means no existing investors can sell, only the public shareholders can sell. And that's to allow an orderly market for the company's shares to develop. And I once saw some stock we held in a company that was to go public in Europe. It was a 1-year lockup. That's the only time I've seen 1 year. The remaining stock needs to be registered to sell. And one of the rights of the preferred stock I showed you earlier was registration rights. The investors will specify their ability to register the stock so they can sell it, and they'll normally do it so that they can register their stock and sell it ahead of when the original seed investors and management can sell. You can sell limited amount rules under 144, which I won't go into. If you take my share certificate down off the wall and turn it over, it says the shares represented by this certificate, and I can't read the fine print here, but essentially it says you can't sell them. So if I took my share certificate, gave it to my stockbroker and said, sell these shares, he'd turn it over and he'd read that and he said, sorry, I can't sell them. You have to send it back to the company and ask them to reissue it without that on the back. Okay, so that's everything goes well, okay? The happy cycle. Now let's look at the dark side, because with a startup company, things usually go wrong. Let's say the company does not meet its milestones for the Series B financing. The Series B price, now Series C, Venture Fund C won't touch this thing with a 10-foot barge pole. So only the existing investors will pay if they think the company's worth saving. And they say, guys, we're only going to pay 60 cents a share, not $2 per share, as in the original. That's what we call a down round. We can't bring in Fund C. As I said, only existing investors. And let's say we're $1 million of work short of getting to the milestone, and we still need 10 million to get to IPO. So we need to raise $11 million. Now, would you do this in practice? Nah, you'd probably raise the million and then hope to raise the 10 million normally. But I'm going to do it this way to illustrate just how bad things can get, okay? You need $1 million to get back on track and 10 million to go to market. Now we've got to sell 18.3 million shares to raise $11 million, not 2 million shares, okay? Professor Stake is now worth $300,000, and remember, the wife hadn't yet bought the house in the country, and she's definitely not going to make a commitment yet until we fix this thing. So his stake is down 33% versus being up 400% in the happy scenario. And what you're going to see is a major shift in ownership from the common shares to the preferred. So here we are. Series B is now 9 million shares each, raising 5.5 million shares each. They now own 88% on an issued and outstanding basis, and 81% on a fully diluted basis. The value of the stakes has all gone down. Value of the company is down to $15 million. Post-money, pre-money was only $4 million. Okay? And so you can see the founders, seed investors, the employees own way less than they did. So let's assume the company gets back on track and it gets to that right point and it spends the 10 million and it's ready for IPO. Because of the cram down, the investment bankers may decide the company needs to reduce the number of shares outstanding. They've got 25 million shares outstanding versus 12 million, 13 million in the original scenario, right? So they say, guys, you're going to do a reverse split. For every 1 or 2 shares you used to own, now you own 1, okay? With that, gets us back close to 13 million shares. Professor Stake is now worth $2 million, up 667% from the depths of the Series B, but way less, half of what it was in the original happy scenario. And a company called Accusphere, which was a Bob Langer company out of MIT, it was developing a in vivo imaging agent for vascular disease. And if there's one thing you learn from this you should never do in vivo diagnostics. Why? They go in the body. They have the same phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trial regulatory process as a drug, but you get paid for a diagnostic. They are a miserable business. Don't do them, okay? His company did an A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and J financings. I've never seen anything like it. I know about it because the Boston University Venture Fund invested in Series B. And when we got to consider these, I argued vigorously against them, and we did not invest in them. It was founded in 1993. I'm trying to remember the name. They had a female CEO, and this woman could charm blood from a stone. I mean, how do you get up to Series J, right? That was it. perfluorobutane polymer microspheres to detect coronary artery disease. Never got anything approved anywhere. It did a 1-for-10 reverse split prior to its IPO, so $14 a share in 2003. We got our money back because all of the warrants that I'll show you in a moment didn't get issued. And it did another 1-for-10 reverse split in 2012 and seems to have finally quietly died in 2012, 19 years after it was founded. Not everything Bob Langer does turns to gold. Here is the cap table after our IPO and the reverse split. Here's our 8 million. Value of the company is back close to 164 million, close to where we were. I've shown here the difference between the value created here and the original scenario. You can see the professor makes half as much as he used to. Fund A and Fund B, they make out like gangbusters because they put in all the money at the very cheap Series B. And then Fund C is out of it because they weren't in on this one. Okay? And if you look at the build-up of the value of the company over time, big difference at Series B, obviously, but not that much difference by the time we get to IPO. Acquisition is the alternative to the IPO. The benefit is immediate liquidity. The dark side of an acquisition is, from the entrepreneur's and management's perspective, is liquidation preferences. This is an amount, a payment received by preferred stock holder on liquidation or acquisition of the company that goes out before anything else, usually at least equal to the original investment, can be a multiple of the original investment. And participating preferred stock is after payment of the preferences, remaining funds are distributed pro rata to all shareholders. So the preferred shareholders get a second bite at the cherry, including the preferred. It's a double dip. Venture capitalists love acquisitions because they get their double dip. So here is our acquisition with liquidation preferences. And this was the original happy scenario. Everything's going well. The Series A has a liquidation preference of 1 times the share price of $1, and Series B, again, 1. And this is the amount of money that goes out for the preferences. This is the balance. That's the total. Here's how much we would have got from the IPO. Oh, and by the way, I priced this at $7.20 because the investment bankers and things like that will normally charge a premium to the company for doing this, so you get less out. And you can see the professor makes about $1 million less going the acquisition route than the IPO route. But, he gets 77.3% of what he was going to get. Now, if you look at liquidation preferences after a cram down, and as part of the cram down, not only did they say, guys, it's 60 cents a share, not $1 a share, $2 a share, they said it's a 3x liquidation preference. Oh, look how many shares they got to put that on. When you look, and I'm sorry, these got reformatted after I sent them over. This is the amount that goes out in the preferences. Only 56 million left for everybody else. And you can see the professor has lost, versus the base case acquisition, they've lost 2/3 of their money. Okay? Ugly. That's how ugly it can get. That's how University College London got £475. Yeah?
Who decided that they have to go for accretion like one who founded the company, CEO, or the venture capitalist ABCC? Who is the controller of the company till the ABCC?
So, who is the controller of the company and decides whether to go acquisition, whether to go IPO? Is it the founders? Is it the CEO? Who is it? The board of directors, absolutely right, okay? By now, the founders are likely not on the board of directors anymore, and the Series A investors might not be, because you have to keep your board small, but the board composition of a board of a company changes a great deal over time. Non-dilutive funding. There are great benefits to founders and management if grants can be used to fund early stage development. And from what I hear, you people in India are really good at doing this because there's so little investment capital around. So where do you get it? In the US, SBIR grants, other federal sources, corporate partners. You get a corporate partner to put in money to help you develop the technology. And then philanthropies. This is referred to as non-diluting funding because the new company doesn't have to issue stock to get the money. No dilution to existing shareholders. So let's assume that our NewCo can get grants to replace its Series A investment. How will you do this? I eliminate the Series A shares from the cap table. This results in a lower pre-money value for Series B. But the company is at the same stage of development, so it should have the same pre-money valuation for Series B. So using GoalSeek, I set the pre-money to 15.5 million by varying the share price, and the share price for Series B increases from $2 to $3.26. At the higher price, fewer shares have to be sold in the Series B. So not only did you not give out shares in Series A, you give out fewer shares in Series B, 3.1 million versus 5 million. So there's even less dilution. And what you find is the founders, management, and seed investors' stakes increase in value by 63% by raising $2 million in grants at the beginning of the company. The VCs make less, but they've invested less. And here's what that looks like, okay? Here's the Series A value. His stake was $1 million originally, and without the Series A, it's up to 1.63 million, and so on down the line. Company now ready for IPO. No Series A, lower number of Series B results in lower pre-money. Again, the company is at the same stage and should be worth the same. So using GoalSeek, set the pre-money to 102 million by varying the share price. And instead of $8, they'll pay $13 a share. Company no longer needs to sell 8 million shares to raise 64 million. It only needs to sell 4.9 million shares. So the founders, management, and seed investor stakes increase again by that magic value of 63%. VCs make less, but have invested less. And that's what that cap table looks like. Okay? Professor makes $6.5 million versus $4 million, and the wife decides they can afford a bigger house in the country. How do you know what to sell a company for? There are two main bases for high-tech companies. If the company is public, it is the market capitalization of the company plus a premium. So you look at how many shares there were, the share price, and typically an acquisition agreement will say the average of perhaps 10 trading days before the announcement to smooth things out. And then you add a premium because you set out in the market, in the stock market, to buy all those shares. As you bought, the share price would go up. And I saw in the paper yesterday that there have been 2 healthcare company acquisitions in the US this week where they paid a 300% premium to the shares. That's a lot. Normally, I expect to see 50 to 80%. If the company is private, X times its sales. I know investment bankers will say, no, it's X times the discounted cash flow, etc. My observation has been this is a pretty good rule of thumb. X varies by industry. So find 3 or 4 recent transactions in the same space, and calculate. I think, and this is held up for many years, in pharmaceuticals, X is 5. Example, Genzyme, big startup in Boston, specializing in rare diseases. First company to specialize in rare diseases, was selling $4 million, and Sanofi agreed to pay $20 billion, 5 times that. And if all this is too complicated, don't bother to take equity at all. Who cares about owning stock? You know, you've got to look after it. What you care about is to be able to sell the stock. So some people ask for an exit fee. The US National Institutes of Health isn't allowed to acquire stock in private companies in return for its technology. So it does an exit fee. And it's actually published the table. If it's preclinical, if it's discovery stage, 0.75% of the exit amount. If it's preclinical, 1.5% of the exit amount. And if there's human data, 3% of the exit amount. Pretty well. I think a lot of the Israeli universities do an exit fee. Okay. Simpler, cleaner, etc. There are 2 great movies about startups, startup.com, 2guystarted.com, and it's actually filmed in real time. One of the founders, an investment banker at Goldman Sachs, was a Harvard grad, went back to his reunion, got chatting to this Egyptian guy who was a movie producer, and tells him he's going to do this startup, this .com startup. And the Egyptian guy says, wow, that sounds really interesting. Can I come along and make a movie? And he says, yeah. And so he's going along making a movie, and like one venture capitalist even let the camera into the negotiating room. The other venture capitalist said, the hell you're bringing that camera in here? And there's some shots in through the window of the conference room. And I won't spoil it, but it is so emotional. I used to show both of these movies in the 2 classes I taught. And it takes up most of the evening to watch the movie and then discuss it. And if a course at a US university at the time, my course cost $4,000, and this was 1/14 of your course, it was going to be the most expensive movie you ever watched in your life. But in the evaluation, when I asked the students, was it worth watching the movie? They always said absolutely. So I won't spoil this, but you will see the stresses between these friends. You will watch the CEO cycle through girlfriends who just can't stand the strain of what he's doing. Truly, and as I said, it's a truly ugly buyout of a vested founder who didn't join the company. Plus a whole lot of other emotional stuff. And then Extraordinary Measures, the very thinly disguised account of Genzyme's development of Lumizyme, and it stars Harrison Ford. That's it. They are great movies. I do recommend them to you. More information. I wrote this up for the Journal of Commercial Biotechnology. By then it was online. I mean, I told you my risk-adjusted net present value article was in this before it went online. And I've also included this as the second half of the Intellectual Property Evaluation Manual for academic institutions that I did for WIPO. Okay, questions? I know what you're thinking. God, wouldn't it be nice if that amount of investment money were available in India? You know, I am blown away by how much your companies do with how little money. You heard Parul, right? She will get to the end of phase 2 in India on $8 million. So I formulated a rule last night. It's my 10x rule. And it's based on 2 data points. It's based on the price of chicken sandwiches at Burger King. The one round the corner from my hotel, you get 2 chicken sandwiches for $1. In Boston, that's $10, 10x. And then a company was telling me it's the average cost of fully loaded cost of its employees was $20,000 a year. In America, that would have been 200,000 at least, 10x. So my theory is that things cost 10 times less in India than in the US. So Perul raised $8 million here. In America, she'd have had to raise $80 million. So I'm full of admiration for your startups, but I'm glad I'm not one of them. Questions?
Does a TTO decide the equity model or the university has a standard model?
There'll be a standard model that's built up over time. My model was the anti-dilution model. It had worked very, very well. And then I had a boss who said, why are we only getting 5% and the faculty members getting 10%? Get a much higher percentage. So I went from the anti-dilution model to the fair share model, being treated as an equal founder. I made the mistake of doing that with a company being started by the chair of our pulmonary division, a very powerful man. He was very, very unhappy, and I think that's what led to me getting fired. So when you've got a model that works, stick with it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
And how does the university decide to exit? At what stage?
You have no choice. You have no control. The company controls the exit. Now, the question you might ask is, if the company goes public, when do you decide to sell? Was that your question?
Even before it goes public?
No. You have, as I said, on the back of the share certificate, you can't sell them, okay? And the company will probably have included a clause in your agreement that says if you want to sell, you have to offer them to the company first, and the company can buy them back at the price you paid. So it's not very attractive. Most universities have a policy that you sell at first liquidity. So in the case of the IPO, 6 months after the IPO, when the lockup's gone, you sell your shares. What we did at BU, since we had this investment fund, was at first liquidity, we would transfer them to the investment fund, who would pay us the price in the market on that day, and they would take the decision whether to sell. They might decide this thing's a dog and sell it the same day, or they may say we think this company is going to do well and hold on. Most universities' policy is you sell at first liquidity. The University of California has a policy that I think if at the outset of the company you make this election, I think you sell 50% at first liquidity, 25% 6 months later, and you can keep 25% and sell at discretion. But I think that's a bad mistake. I was always very happy selling at first liquidity. Any other questions?
So, very basic question. First of all, thank you so much for covering so much at the breadth and depth also.
It's my second favorite talk to give after valuation.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very basic question, looking at the Indian scenario, how it works there. Basically, if we talk about technology developed by a faculty, and now university and faculty both are thinking of starting a spin-out.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, who is faculty and?
A faculty is a researcher
who
has developed within the university, has developed the technology.
Yep.
And now he is very keen to kick it off as a business.
Yep.
Here India, one of the government entity advocated that a faculty should register a company first, independently. Mm-hmm. It is not a university spin-out. The university transfers the license to the faculty. That means that company X, which is owned by a faculty, and then holds some equity.
Yep.
How it works in US, that is first question. Another question, how the spin-out works, whether the faculty remains the part of university or it becomes the faculty's company. How it works, which is better? That is third question.
Yep. So I'd say it's the same system in the US. The university, I don't think ever does the incorporation. It is either the faculty member or an entrepreneur that the faculty member has met starts the company. And then that company approaches the university, and the university gives it a license of technology. And as part of that license, he gets shares up front in return instead of an upfront fee. And that's when they attach the anti-dilution provisions to the upfront fee.
So what's happening here is, I don't know how many of us are facing this challenge. When it comes to upfront fees, the faculty says, I do not have the money and I'm not capable of raising it at this stage. So the university says, we'll rely on royalty. Is that fine? Because upfront fees, many times at early stage, nobody is able to raise the funds. Especially in this scenario in India, we are dependent on, as you mentioned somewhere, on the seed grants, not on VC funds at early stage. So how it works there? Every time upfront is taken?
So when I did a startup company, I never asked for a cash upfront fee, except for the sunk patent costs. And if those sunk patent costs were too high, I might give them 2, maybe 3 years to pay, but not longer, okay? And I think a lot of US universities are doing that, particularly if it's a big patent portfolio. You know, if it's $200,000-300,000, you would never ask a startup to pay that up front. But you want to try and get paid before they're going to run out of money. And then you have normal license agreements, milestone payments, running royalty. We expect those all the time. It is the UK universities that used to do it. Give me half the founders round, and that's it. No milestones, no running royalties, no nothing. And if you look at the financial performance of British tech transfer offices through the data that's available, they're kind of comparable, adjusted for the volume of research with the US, except for income. They make more money than we get from selling shares, but they get nothing from royalties, nothing from other license fees, and their total income is way less than US universities make. I was deeply shocked. I was having dinner with Tom Hockaday, who ran Oxford for many years. And now he'd been there 10, 15 years by this point. And toward the end of dinner, he said, Ashley, can I ask you a question? When US universities take stock in a startup, do you get milestones and royalties as well? I said, you bet your ass we do, Tom. Absolutely we do. And I was really shocked when he asked that question. And I'm actually going to do a consulting project for a British university, which I think might help me identify how far that model goes.
Yeah.
Because royalties are non-dilutable. As University College London found with Biovex, stock is very dilutable.
Okay, so can we break for tea on this point? Incidentally, Dr. Premnath is going to talk about the Indian aspect in the coming session.